All right. Good morning, everybody. A little bit of a different show today. My buddy Tim Vest, he is on vacation in Iceland right now. So it's just going to be me. And I haven't done one of these podcasts or these Facebook live streams in a while, just myself. So a little excited to actually do it because it's out of my comfort zone. And anybody that's, kind of an entrepreneur, a business person, they understand the value of getting out of your comfort zone. And that's how you continue to learn and grow. So as most of you guys know, Tim and I, we run a mastermind coaching group called Making Moves in Multifamily. And one of the key areas that we specialize in, or I specialize in, is underwriting. So we constantly get a whole bunch of questions. The most common questions being, how do I become a better underwriter? And how do I get faster at underwriting my deals? Hey, good morning, Dennis. Good to see you, buddy. So what I wanted to do is just kind of talk about underwriting. And I feel like not a lot of people kind of talk about this level of stuff, right? When you're looking at doing these Facebook Lives and podcasts and things. Typically, one of these shows would be interviewing somebody or talking about what's going on in the market or things that we're learning. I mean, there's so many different aspects that you could be talking about. But one that's near and dear to my heart is underwriting. You can argue with me till you're blue in the face, but underwriting is the foundation of every real estate deal. Some people will tell you that they think that the debt is the foundation of any deal, and they're not wrong in one way, shape, or form. But how do lenders size up the debt to give you for a deal that you're working on? They look at your underwriting, right? So all roads lead back to underwriting. So I'm not going to pat myself on the back here, but I think that what I do in our partnership is probably one of the most important things, or one of the most important parts, because literally everything is built upon the underwriting. So first things first, the bank is always going to look at your underwriting. Not only are they going to look at your underwriting, they're also going to do their own underwriting in order to make sure that they agree with your assumptions. And there have been plenty of times where we're going through an acquisition or we're going through a refinance, and I would end up spending a day, 2, maybe even 3 days on the phone with the underwriters at the bank going through their assumptions. And it's pretty amazing to see how the bank looks at somebody's underwriting compared to how somebody like myself looks at the underwriting. They always take a far, far, far more conservative look, and we're sometimes a little bit more aggressive. And I don't like to say that it's aggressive, but I think it's more accurate, right? There's a difference between being a conservative underwriter and being an accurate underwriter. Those of you that are far too on the left-hand side, where you're too conservative, and if your rents are 900 and you're underwriting it to 800, your offer is going to be $1 million less than everybody else's, right? So you're probably struggling there in order to get some deal flow and some LOIs accepted, simply because you're just not underwriting it correctly. If your rents are like $900, underwriting them to $875, that's conservative underwriting. And I always like to distinguish that difference there, because when people come into our coaching group, that's something that I really hone in on, and I talk about all the time, the difference between being accurate and being far too conservative, or not even competitive, really, at the end of the day. So, spending a lot of time with the bank, going through their underwriting, going through my underwriting, not only does that give you credibility in the bank's eyes, but it also, like, every time I've done that, I have consistently always gotten more loan proceeds when we're going through a purchase or a refinance. Always, every single time, because you can explain the deal to the bank that doesn't understand that deal. Because most of the time when I'm talking to some of those people, they're sending it to their underwriting team, and those underwriters, they've never bought a deal before. Maybe they're fresh out of college, and they're still learning the ropes. And I know that there's, chain of command, and there's, different people reviewing the deals and approving them and things like that. But really, at the end of the day, there's always like a lead underwriter or lead analyst on your deal at the bank. And you need to, kind of coach them along and hold their hand. One of the examples was when we were refinancing our 92 unit property down in Statesboro, Georgia. The appraisal came in and had the NOI at $666,000. But when the bank was looking at giving us a loan for that same deal, their underwriters came back with an NOI of $556,000. So clearly there was a huge disconnect with over $100,000 of NOI missing. And the loan proceeds were close, but they weren't what we had originally banked on. So we ended up talking with them and showing them how, the other income works and some of the expenses and how everything was being billed back, because they weren't giving us credit for the bill backs of the RUBS, right? Rent utility bill back system. So once we did that, we were able to add, like, they didn't give me a full $100,000 credit, in their underwriting, but they gave me an additional $50 or $60,000 of increased NOI because of that conversation. And because of that conversation, we went from getting loan proceeds of 5 million to loan proceeds of 7.2 million. So clearly you can see that one phone call made a huge, significant impact in that deal. So I can't stress it enough. Like, those of you that are doing the underwriting, whether it's for your own deals or within your partnerships or things like that, I can't stress enough that you need to know this stuff inside out and backwards, because other people are not going to be as comfortable and familiar with the deal as you are. So if you are comfortable with the information and you're super confident about your numbers, that is going to, like, portray when you're having that conversation with the bank. That exuberation of confidence is going to give other people confidence to trust you, to know that you're correct. So knowing your underwriting, super important, super important, and being able to articulate it to the bank is yeah, like Daniel Reddick is saying, the devil's in the details. I hate when people are rushing us to get an LOI out the door because they want to get an offer on the table and they want to get it to the seller right away. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make an offer on this deal, but I need to know my underwriting first. I have to make some phone calls. I got to figure out what my rents are, my expenses are. I have to come up with my business plan, because as soon as I put together that LOI, that number is what that number is. Like, you don't make an offer on a property that you are not going to be able to perform on. So yes, contrary to that, I do understand that LOIs are non-binding contracts, but every time you give out an LOI and then you don't perform on it, if you won the LOI, you're getting a bad reputation with the brokers and with the sellers. And it's a really small world. I mean, we buy deals in the Carolinas mostly. We have a couple redheaded stepchilds that are not in the Carolinas, but for the most part, everyone in the Carolinas kind of knows who we are now, which is great and really makes our lives a whole lot easier. But that's because we have great underwriting, we make good LOIs, and then we perform on those LOIs. So, to answer, so that's why underwriting is so important. Everything goes back to the bank, and the bank is your biggest investor. The second part of that is why your underwriting is so important, is because your investors, they are going to grill you on questions about the returns. And all of the return metrics are derived from your underwriting. So the more clearly you can answer a question to an investor about why the returns are what they are, what the IRR is, what the AAR is, what the equity multiple is, what the cash on cash return is. All of those things are so crucially important, because you're dealing with people's hard-earned money here. And if you don't know the ins and outs of the deal because you're not that comfortable with the underwriting, then they're not going to be as comfortable with you. And for those of you that are, capital raisers, one of the things that you absolutely must do is you must have a conversation with the lead underwriter on whoever found that deal, whoever is sponsoring that deal. You need to talk to them about the underwriting upside down and backwards, because when your investors are coming to you asking you questions, the moment you stutter and you say, hey, I got to get back to you on that, there is some level of respect that comes with, hey, I'm not going to tell you a lie, but there's even more respect that's earned when you can answer a question right off the bat. So one of the things that I did when I first got started in the real estate syndication world was I made a whole list of arguments that investors could have with me, like why numbers are what they are, just any kind of objection that you would get from an investor. I wrote it down, and then what I did was I went through and I learned how to find what the answer was to that question. And what you start to realize after you've raised a couple $1,000,000 is that investors typically ask the same questions all the time. So you really start to know what's important in their eyes, and you know exactly where the underwriting you need to pay attention to. Yes, you have to pay attention to the whole thing, right? So don't forget that piece. But there are very specific points in the underwriting that you need to make sure that you know very, very well, because an investor is going to ask you that question. First and foremost, investors' biggest primary concern is how and when am I getting my money back, right? Irregardless of how much money I'm going to make, when am I going to get my original investment back? Because I don't want to lose money, right? Warren Buffett's rules. Rule number one, never lose money. Rule number two, see rule number one, right? So that is the first, that's the forefront of every conversation is what's the exit plan? How am I getting my money back? And when is that, right? Those are the top three questions. Obviously, everyone's going to have a little bit different investor metrics, and they're going to go down a rabbit hole of what's important to them on going in cap rates and exit cap rates and stabilized cap rates. What's my income year over year? What's my expense ratio year over year? How are we controlling those expenses? What's the debt coverage ratio at acquisition? What's the debt coverage ratio at stabilization? What's your DSCR at refinance? What are the loan terms at refinance? There are so many things that go into your underwriting file. And I get a lot of questions of, Tim, how long do you actually spend on these files? And the moment that we get an LOI that's been counter offered or accepted, I usually have a really good idea of what the underwriting is going to be like. But at that point, that's when I dive really deep. So, one second. So, all right. So the headline of this post was, how do you become a rock star underwriter? And, that's what we cover I talk about it every Tuesday in our coaching group. We go through deals, we underwrite them together. We talk about these things. I challenge them as if I'm an investor in order to help people build that muscle. Because once you can raise a lot of money and you can underwrite deals, you're very valuable to a lot of people in this world. So to become a rockstar investor, the first thing you need to do is learn your market and pick your market. First two things. You got to pick exactly which market you're looking in. The biggest thing that I see that people are failing all the time on is that they are looking for deals all over the country. They don't even know what a good deal is if it slapped them in the face because they're looking at deals in Florida, in Ohio, in Texas, in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, because they don't want to lose an opportunity. They're like, Tim, I got to look at every deal because I got to make sure that I get an opportunity. And I can say with hard honesty here, if you don't pick a single market and really dive into that one market, you're never going to be able to find a really good opportunity because you can't identify it because you don't know the market metrics. So once you pick your market, you're able to know the class of property that you're looking for, the size of property you're looking for, the cap rates for a stabilized product that you're looking for. You start to know how much it's going to cost you for labor and materials in those markets. You're going to understand how the taxes are calculated in that market. You're going to have a rough idea of what your average cost per door per year on your insurance is. And all of those things are that's like the foundation of your underwriting right there. It's CapEx, income, expenses, and your expenses are your taxes, your insurance, your property management fees, your payroll. If you're if you have to pay the utilities as an owner, how much can you charge back to your tenants, right? I mean, there's an industry standard depending on your market. We have some property that we do a rubs, and the max that we could do is like $35 because everybody else on the street is doing $35. But there's other properties where we're doing a bill back of $180 because we're paying one, more utilities, but two, that it's just common to pay that much in bill back in utilities. So knowing your market, knowing your areas, get super specific. Like the more specific, the better, because it makes it so much easier for you to identify a good deal. That also leads into how do I underwrite deals faster? Well, what's the number one thing that's time consuming when you're underwriting deals? It's looking up the information. So if you're a market expert and you know exactly what you're looking for in a specific target market, you'll know all of those things off the top of your head. Like you could ask me any of those things about a lot of the markets in the Carolinas, especially the ones that we're buying deals in. I can rattle off all that stuff right off the top of my head. I don't even have to think about it. So what might take you an hour to 2 hours to underwrite a deal to get an LOI out, I can probably do it in 20 minutes just because I've got that experience. I've built that muscle. I've done the repetition over and over and over and over again. And let me tell you something. When you can get back to a broker that fast with underwriting or that fast with questions on the underwriting after you've gone through it, they're going to respect you so much because you're not wasting their time and they want to make money. And brokers make money when they sell deals. So the more you call people and you waste their time and you just ask questions and you never make even an offer on that deal, you're wasting their time. And one of my favorite brokers, shout out to um, Chris Yeagle down in Charleston, South Carolina. He runs a great little brokerage down there. And I'm not afraid to tell you guys who he is because I have a great relationship with him. So, Chris, he tells us that one of the ways that he measures buyers is in a price per hour. How many hours do I need to spend with this particular buyer in order to sell a deal? That's how he tracks it. And the more money you make him per hour, the more favorable you're going to be in his eyes. And what does that mean? That means that you are not asking dumb questions. You don't waste his time. You get on the phone, you talk about what you need to, you get it in, you get it out, and you're onto the races. It's the people that like to drag their feet and ask a million questions, or the biggest pet peeve that I've always heard is those people that the information is in the portal, right? Like a deal, they call it a deal room, or whatever, you got to sign an NDA to get the information. Most of the information that you're looking for is within that portal. The broker spends so much time putting that information into the portal. If you just go and look and you spend 20 minutes to go look through that data, I'm sure it's going to answer most of your questions. So not only if you're a market expert in that area, and then you get any specific questions, you can go right to the data to figure it out. Now you have basically all your questions answered. You should have a pretty good idea of what you want to pay or what you can pay for that deal. Um, all of that is so crucially important, but it all comes back to the underwriting, right? I got a question here from Dalton. Dalton, how do you structure your deals with your partners? Dalton, are you talking about limited partners or general partners? um, so I'll wait for him to answer that. But yeah, so back to the underwriting. That's how you become a market expert is you isolate yourself on a single area. Very, very, very specific. Know exactly what you want. Brokers want to have a conversation with you about what you want to buy, but I always like to um, relate it back to the broker's point of view. Is you have if you're a broker and you're posting this deal for sale, you might have like 1,000 people reach out to you. 1,000 people reach out to one person about a single deal. Who's going to stand out the most in that initial contact? Probably the person that they got a good relationship, for one, and two, probably the person that doesn't ask dumb questions, that they could have found the information in the portal. And it also shows their lack of experience if they're asking very basic level questions. Um, so Dalton, he's specifically talking about the LPs. So how do you structure your deals with your limited partners? So that depends, Dalton, on the deal itself. We have some partners that like to be interest only. That we call those debt partners. We also have equity partners. So we'll do an equity split plus a preferred return. It really depends on how good the deal is, and really, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but how cheap your investor money is. Some investors are more expensive than others, just like banks, right? Some investors, they want large pieces of equity and a very high preferred return. Other people are fine with just, a lower return that's more consistent, that's paid more steadily. So having an understanding of your access to capital with your limited partners is important because that will ultimately dictate your deal structure. Oh, here we go. Got another great question from Facebook user. What 2 to 3 levers can you pull to adjust your underwriting in order to increase your purchase price? Well, there's a lot there, right? One, you have to have an understanding of your debt options. That is by far the biggest lever that you can pull. You can pull the lever based on your relationships with the bank. And if you can get cheaper debt than everybody else, you're going to be able to pay more, right? Because I like to make the analogy of underwriting and kind of syndicating deals and structuring real estate deals is like algebra. And in algebra, you're solving for X. In our world, as multifamily syndicators, X is investor returns. And if one investor is requiring a 20% return and another investor is requiring a 15% return, well, I can offer a little bit more of a price and utilize the investor's money that's okay with a 15% return. But if the investor wants a 20% return, then I'm going to have to pay a little bit less, right? Um, LP return expectations are two levers that are levers that you can pull. The debt is the other big lever that you can pull, and the third lever that you can pull is your capex spend. Have One of the things that I see that people commonly do is they will budget to. They will. Sorry, that's a broker call me right now. Actually, um, capex is one of the things that I can see that people you typically they will over budget or be a little overzealous um, based on their business plan. So typically, I like to have a good capex budget, right? So let's get that out of the way. But the other side of the equation of that is there are a lot of people that will buy a 100-unit property and assume that they are going to get into every single unit and turn every single unit. That's just simply not the case. You will always have some tenants that just won't leave, that will, accept the rent increase, and you're not going to have to deploy that money. So having an understanding of the prior performance of the property, because hopefully or potentially you're buying it for somebody that has already done some level of renovations, you can have an understanding of what do I need to spend in order to get to this level of rent, and what do I have to spend in order to get to this level of rent. And one thing that can increase your offer price is by decreasing your capex, because you potentially could be over renovating your product in order to get your market rate rent. I know I'm guilty of it. I've done it before. I mean, I like to use an example. I own a 24 unit property myself with no partners, just me, and I was spending about $10,000 a unit, and we were over renovating the product, right? So we brought the rents from 450 to 500. They were like 450 to $500 a month. We brought those up to 750 on a renovated unit. Okay, it cost me $10,000 to do that. The other side of it is on the units that the people didn't want to leave, I gave them rent renewals at $695 and they stayed, and I didn't have to spend any money. So now what I'm looking at is, do I want to spend $10,000 to go from $695 a month in rent to $750? You see how that's kind of like a diminishing return at that point. So making sure that you're budgeting appropriately for your capex spend is important. Conversely, not having enough money in your capex budget will make you think you can overpay for a deal. So, the sword cuts both ways, really, at the end of the day. Again, it comes back to accurate underwriting, knowing exactly what you need to spend in order to achieve your business plan. And sometimes what I like to do is I'll run multiple different underwriting files, and each one of those files will be targeted a different rent level, right? So, in some underwriting, we'll underwrite it and say, okay, we're going to bring this from a C to a B class, and each one of those units is going to cost us $18,000 to renovate, but we're going to be able to achieve a $300 rent premium. Okay, well, what if we only spend $10,000 and instead of a $300 rent premium, we get a $225 premium? What do the returns look like when you lower the level of renovation that you're doing? So you have to think critically about your underwriting in every way or every critical step. But the three biggest levers are definitely going to be your debt, your investors, your access to capital, and then your capex. I don't. I know probably somebody out there is thinking, well, Tim, you could probably just adjust your cap rate. And I don't believe that at all, because the cap rate is dictated by the market and you have no lever there to pull. Like, you have no control over that. You can only control the controllables, which are your investor expectations, like your cost of capital, which debt you accept, from the bank, because you can go out and get multiple different offers from the bank. And then how much money are you willing to spend on the property, right? Because everything else is dictated from those three triangles right there. That's your three-legged stool. The amount of renovation you do will dictate your rents. Your rents will dictate what the value of your property is based on the market cap rate. Your debt is going to be affecting your cash flow and your leverage, and your investor expectations is going to be how much you can offer for the property itself in order to meet those expectations. So, kind of a long-winded response, but that's why underwriting is such a complicated topic. That's why I talk about it every Tuesday with our group, because it is so vitally important. And there's so many different variables. I mean, I could sit here and go on forever about underwriting. As you can see, I'm very passionate about it. Um, so that was a great question, though. I appreciate you asking. Any other questions that we have going on right now? If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. But those are single-handedly the ways that I have found to become a rock star underwriter, to bring value to your partnership, to bring value to your investors, to lead with confidence in negotiating with banks and negotiating with investors. All of it comes back to the underwriting, being a specialist in your market. Um, and pre-thinking what somebody's going to ask you. So, I don't know if my boss Jen, my old boss Jen, is listening to this, but something I learned in my W-2 world life when I had a W-2 job was um, trying to pre-think what somebody else is going to ask you. Right, asking the question at the end of the day is the best way that you could think about what is somebody else going to want to know from this information, right? When you get horse blinders and you're looking at one of these deals, and everyone's guilty of it, right? You could fall in love with the numbers, and you could fall in love with the numbers and then just kind of make it work, right? But you really need checks and balances there. But having an understanding of what somebody else wants to know from this information, like taking a look at the information from somebody else's perspective, is going to do you more good than thinking about it from your own perspective. And credit to my boss Jen, she always used to say, I'm just asking the question. And that's what you need to do to yourself. You just need to ask the question. It doesn't matter if you've underwritten 1,000 deals and the insurance is going to be $500 a unit a year on this, right? Ask yourself the question: did I get a quote on this deal? Do I think I could get it cheaper? Is it adequate insurance coverage, right? Because insurance is changing all the time. Do we think we can get better debt rates? Do we have access to different capital? Like, there's no harm in asking the question, and you need to do that from your investor's point of view and also the bank's point of view. Is what questions are they going to ask, right? I don't know who this was, but this is exact the best way to say what I just said in a lot of words. 3 simple words: anticipate their needs. If you can anticipate somebody else's needs through your underwriting, you're going to have far more success with closing deals, closing investors, building relationships with the banks, building relationships with brokers. Everything comes back to anticipating other people's needs. Lead with value first. I live my life by it. A lot of my investors, they get my handwritten note, and that's one of the quotes that I live by. Zig Ziglar is, if you help other people achieve their goals, you can achieve whatever you want in life. We got a couple questions coming in here now. So, Dalton, do you syndicate? Yes, we syndicate deals. We do JVs. I buy deals myself. Syndication is a tool. I don't believe that every deal is good for syndication. It's expensive to do a syndication. You're talking $10,000, $15,000 in PPM fees and legal fees and things like that. So there's a lot of paper pushing around, and there's a lot of admin work that goes behind syndicating. So we use it as a tool, but we do syndications. We buy with our own money. We do seller financing. We do everything, right? Anything that comes up. Here we go. From Luke: thoughts on running the numbers as an Airbnb or renting by the room? Do you only run the numbers on a long-term rental as a long-term rental? Yes, Luke. I don't, full disclosure, I don't do anything with Airbnb. I don't do anything in short-term rental. We have kind of anticipated looking at some of that stuff in the future, but my default is, if anything changes in the short-term rental world, then you need to make sure that the investment still makes sense on a long-term basis. Now, some people that have a higher risk tolerance or risk profile will underwrite the deal as an Airbnb only. And if it doesn't work out, they'll just sell the property and break even, and they're fine with that, right? Like, I don't have that risk tolerance. I would want to know, if I lose the ability to short-term rent any of these units, what is it going to rent on a long-term basis? What do I need to do in order to break even? Because the number one problem that you can find yourself in is that your long-term rents don't cover your debt service. And now you're operating at a deficit. And if you're operating at a deficit, that's how you declare bankruptcy, and bad things happen at that point, right? So you need to make sure that at a bare minimum, if you lose the ability to rent by room or Airbnb or whatever unique abilities you're doing, you need to be able to make sure that your long-term rentals at least cover your expenses and your debt service. Manpreet, this is by far one of the most productive and informative sessions I've watched in this community. Great job, Tim Vitale. Thank you, Manpreet. Appreciate it. We live our lives by transparency. So I just want to talk about real things, real talk, right? At the end of the day. What percentage of deals that cross your desk are you able to be competitive with in today's market? And how has your underwriting assumptions changed in the last 12 months? Boom. That's a great question, Jaden. Thank you for asking that. I would say we have an abnormally high competitive offer ratio here. Um, we pretty much do our deals with three people. And anytime one of those three people bring a deal to us, it works. So basically, they bring it to us and they say, "Here, Tim, here's your next deal, right? This is the one that you're going to buy. I know the underwriting works. Here's what you need to pay for it in order to make the deal work. Make the offer and we'll close on it," right? So as you start to build relationships with brokers and sellers and really establish yourself as like somebody who can close on deals in the market, the deals that cross your desk are a little different. I'm not going to lie. The ones that are mass marketed, those are always the ones that hit my inbox and I don't even look at. And I'm always enticed by them because I would love to do some of these other deals that are floating around. But the the percentage of those deals is very, 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 very little, like maybe less than 1%. But if one of three people send me four people, one of four people send me a deal, it's like an 80% chance that we're doing that deal, right? That it works and that we'll be able to close on it. And how has your underwriting assumptions changed in the last 12 months? We are being far more conservative the on the insurance increases because we've gotten burned by that in the last 12 months. The insurance rates have gone insane, and I never could have expected it. I mean, you're seeing 100%, 200%, 300% increases in insurance costs. Everything else across the board was working, but now what I'm doing, I'm budgeting at least a 30% increase year over year. For insurance for the next 36 months. I hope that that's not true, but we'll see. It all depends on what happens in the insurance markets over the next couple of months. The other thing is, I no longer assume that we could get 70 to 75% refinance debt. When I look at when I underwrite a refinance now, I typically will use somewhere between 60 and 65% loan to value with a 1.4 debt coverage ratio. That we closed a deal recently, and that was one of the terms from the bank was on they actually cut our funds by like 50 grand because of the debt coverage ratio was short. It was like 1.39 instead of 1.40. So pay attention to your debt coverage ratio on your refinance. I think a lot of people miss that. They think they can go get a 75 or 80% loan to value and your debt coverage ratio is like 0.8. So big lever there to make sure that you're paying attention to. Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate you, brother. I know that I see you on here every Tuesday. I appreciate that. And good morning. This is very helpful. Thank you for educating us on the process. Jeff, appreciate it. If you ever need any help, you guys know where to find me. So, all right. With that, that was fun. I really enjoyed it. I didn't know if I was going to make it a full 30 minutes on my own, but hey, I get on a roll when you start talking about underwriting and deal finding and why underwriting is so important. So, if you have any questions or you're interested in our coaching program and you want to learn more about this underwriting stuff, reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation with you and hopefully we can help you out. So with that, we will see. Tim Vest not here. Look at that. Old habits die hard. Missed you, Tim. But yeah, we will see you next week. Peace.